Hello and welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series, brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau. My name is Philip Breitenbuscher, and I'm your host for today's webinar entitled Lessons Learned, CCWIS Technical Assistance Monitoring Reviews. We would like to encourage active participation in today's webinar. And so there are several ways that you can engage and ask questions throughout the presentation. The first way is to submit your question using the Q&A feature, which should be located at either the bottom or the top of your screen in your ribbon. The icon should look similar to what's on the right side of my screen. Please submit your questions there, and we will do our best to answer all questions during the webinar. You can also ask a question live by using the raise hand feature. And once you've done that, we will privately chat with you to make sure you are ready to ask that question. And then we will unmute your line and you can ask the question to our presenters or to our panelists. If you've dialed in using your telephone, you can also ask a question live by dialing *9, and then we will unmute your line. Also, after today's webinar, you can continue to ask questions by emailing them to cwis.questions@acf.hhs.gov. Lastly, we'd encourage your feedback. At the conclusion of today's webinar, there will be a link to a survey in which you can give your feedback and provide us with recommendations for future webinars. We will drop that link into the chat about a third of the way or nearing the end of the webinar. Plus, at the end, I will also provide you with that link again. Once again, your feedback is very important to us. I would like now to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. First, I'll introduce to you David Allenson, who's Information Technology Specialist with the Division of State Systems. Thank you, David, for being here.
Thank you.
Also, I'd like to introduce Alex Camberis. He is a technical assistance contractor with the Division of State Systems Federal Contract Support. And once again, my name's Phil Breitenbuscher, and I'll be your moderator. I'm also with DSS Federal Contract Support. Oops, sorry about that. All right, I think at this time, I'm going to hand off to David to cover the agenda.
Thank you, Phil. Today, we're going to be doing an overview of the CCWIS Technical Assistance Monitoring Review process. And in that review process, we'll be looking at the past 3 years. We'll be spotlighting things such as connections between search tools and data quality. And we'll also be spotlighting program and IT collaboration. We'll also discuss lessons learned. And we'll also look at the 2023-2024 focus, which will continue to be data quality, reporting, and user experience. Next slide, please. I think we might have skipped a slide in the beginning, Phil. Learning objectives. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Learning objectives. After participating in this webinar, attendees should be able to apply or share lessons learned from the CCWIS Technical Assistance Monitoring Reviews. We'd like to discuss what we've learned and get feedback from the states. We're continually learning and improving the tools. We'd like to understand the benefits of program and IT collaboration and how to make that happen. And we'd also like to acknowledge the value of using self-assessment tools to proactively identify risks, system shortcomings, or deficiencies in system planning, design, and/or implementation. It's important to note that the goals within the self-assessment tools are some of the most important areas. They allow internal mechanisms to assess systems and align practice and goals of the agency. And there are many opportunities to use them. Agencies and teams want to have a shared vision for the tools. The technical assistance review process is an effort to change the paradigm we use to partner with agencies to build systems and how we assess whether the systems are effective. If done well, technical assistance activities will assist agencies in identifying and resolving the most difficult challenges ahead of them. The compliance process shifts to a recognition that the basic CCWIS requirements are being met. The agency understands the system requirement requires ongoing support. We know agencies are looking for knowledge and insight about what other states have done that are helpful and what pitfalls other states have encountered in the process of planning and working towards implementation that they could avoid. Next slide, please. Oop, we're a little bit out of order, I think. Let's say we should have jumped to, yep. We already went over the agenda. And now the overview, CCWIS Technical Assistance Monitoring Review Process. Next slide, please. There are several goals of an iterative CCWIS Technical Assistance Monitoring Review Process. The process promotes early identification of risks and potential compliance issues. Compliance under CCWIS is different than under CCWIS. It provides freedom and flexibility, and the self-assessment tools help you to align program goals with the system. It also allows for strong technology strategies that support the needs of the agency and program. It involves agency leadership and program staff, as well as project and technology teams. And it encourages involvement of multiple stakeholders and system users throughout the system lifecycle process to ensure positive and successful user experiences. It incorporates lessons learned to continually improve technical assistance and support implementation of an effective CCWIS assessment review process. It supports collaboration between ACF and the agency based on specific project plans and needs and/or high-risk areas affecting project success. It also promotes ongoing technical assistance and additional considerations, and again, supports ongoing self-assessment by the agency to encourage internal reviews and continuous improvement while ensuring alignment with federal regulations applicable to CCWIS and agency program needs. It's an iterative process that DSS and states employ to review the system and program over time. An example of this would be design reviews that can occur many times over the life cycle of a system, depending on whether or not a state is found to be compliant. Early technical assistance is the most beneficial to catch challenges even before the system is developed. Next slide, please. Use of the self-assessment tools to identify gaps in practice or system issues can be used to clearly articulate requirements for RFPs, leading to vendors being able to provide a solution that fits the program needs. The following is a list of our optional self-assessment tools. They address the same category of information we'll be requesting during our monitoring reviews. They can identify gaps in requirements, program, and system. And these tools support and prompt conversation between program and IT teams. They also identify critical areas of the project. And as it states here, the self-assessment tools can be found within TB7, the technical assistance, self-assessment tools, and monitoring reviews. Next slide, please. The self-assessment tools are useful at all stages of CCWIS project, from planning through maintenance and operations. And the agencies may use self-assessment tools to determine what features will support federal, state, or tribal welfare program needs and document ongoing CCWIS progress. An example of this would be State X is currently using self-assessment tools during planning. It helps to connect practice and policy issues and business process reengineering. It also provides a gap analysis in the practice and/or legacy system compared to the to-be state of a new future system. The use of the self-assessment tools before and during development versus doing them after a system has been started and/or built. It's okay, it's easier to course correct earlier. If done after the fact, it may be too costly and too time intensive. If the self-assessment tools are used after the system is built, it's not a waste. It's helpful to see the potential deficits and risks, and it can also help in managing expectations, including long-term funding. The 15 compliance tools make sure a system stays compliant, relevant, and is aligned with program goals over time. And now I'll turn it over to Phil, but to Alex, but before I do, I'll ask Phil, are there any questions?
Nope, we don't have any questions yet, but I would like to just remind our participants that you can ask questions throughout by using that Q&A button at the top of your screen or at the bottom, wherever your ribbon is located. Please submit your questions there and we will do our best to answer those. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
All right, so David has covered some of the background behind Technical Bulletin 7 and the 15 self-assessment tools. I'm going to be talking about some of the findings from our first 3 years of monitoring reviews. And the connection between the two concepts is that as we do our monitoring reviews, there should be no surprises to the type of questions or topics that we will be addressing. The 15 self-assessment tools are a good indicator of the things we will be focused on. They're good, as David mentioned, to do at any stage of design and development or planning. And so as we go to the next slide, I will be talking about how some of that played out over the last 3 years. So as you see on the screen, we've reviewed 9 projects over the last 3 years. And those included 8 design reviews. So 8 systems, we looked at design, 6 intake modules. In 2 projects, we looked at investigation, and 2 we did foster care and service provider management. And finally, in 1 system, we looked at case management, and 1 we looked at 4E payment eligibility. Now, those don't add all up to 9, but because in some monitoring reviews, we looked at multiple modules. And again, when we're looking at one of these modules, for example, intake, more often than not, we are looking at the self-assessment tool and asking questions from there, whether during a demonstration or perhaps during interviews with user groups or agency leadership. And so there's a direct connection between what's in those self-assessment tools with what we will be looking at during a review. Over the next several slides, I'll be talking about some strengths and challenges we found during these first 3 years. So let's start with the strengths on the next slide. So this is a high-level overview. We grouped several of the findings in different categories here. Now you'll note if you do the math that this adds up to more than 9, because in some cases, for example, an agency could have had several strengths in the project management arena or several strengths spread out across these. So these findings will never match up with the number of views because, like I said, the project could have multiple findings of strengths and challenges. So some of these may be obvious, some of these may not be, just high level. Project management could include things like risk management, coordination of resources, agile practices if your agency has adopted agile, vendor management practices. Governance could be everything from agency leadership involvement to program and IT collaboration, alignment with agency initiatives or priorities, user feedback loops. Modular design comes straight out of the statutory regulations for what should be in a module program needs, or just that, meeting agency program needs or practice models. Design standards, again, come straight out of the language in the statute. And change management are those practices that some agencies have implemented, like rapid response to feedback. Some county-based states adding legislation to encourage county adoption of a system, or perhaps a responsive help desk. I also know that there's a question in the Q&A about when reviews are done, and we'll address that here in a few minutes when we get to the Q&A section. So I see your question and we'll get to you. All right, so these are the high-level areas of strengths we found. On the next slide, please, I will talk about some of the ones just we pulled out for today's conversation. I'm going to spend a whole slide on search tools, but this was an area of strength we saw in several projects and directly connects to data quality, as we'll talk about in a few slides. Document management and integration, some of these systems we've looked at have really moved the needle on how to integrate documents, unstructured data, and integrating with the case management tools and user interface. Quick access to data and dashboards. These newer systems are more responsive to perhaps a manager trying to find out information or a user trying to find out more information about their caseload, but not just active searching, but more passive, automated type presentation of data. For example, children turning 18 in 6 months, alerts, things like that, which are also connected to informative notifications. We were pleased to see some of those in systems we looked at. Guided workflows and clean, easy to use, navigate UI or other areas that are very connected in that, for example, in intake, perhaps there's a very guided workflow that aligns with the agency's policies regarding intake and assignment to investigation. These all are connected back. All these 6 items I have on this slide are connected back to the self-assessment tools. For example, document management, we asked a few questions in the administration tool about that. Data and dashboards is connected to reporting and administration and case management. Guided workflows and the UI are connected to user experience self-assessment tool and data quality. So the states, or the projects rather, that we looked at and saw these strengths, many of them had addressed this through a demonstration or inclusion on their responses to the self-assessment tools they submitted to us as part of the review process. So that's a high level of the strengths, and I will talk about search tool here again in a moment. So let's go to the next slide where we talk about some challenges, which is unfortunately what many people are focused on, but we also appreciate the strengths, and there's a lot of lessons learned here that David will cover in a few slides from now too. So for challenges, again, like with the strengths, we put some broad categories here to lump things under. Data quality can include everything from duplication, perhaps from a poor search tool, or multiple systems. Some agencies are replacing their legacy systems slowly and anticipate having multiple systems for 2 to 3 or longer years. And while it is a planned approach, there's the danger in those years to have some duplication of data if there aren't controls and governance in place. In the efficient, economical, and effective category there, I talked about design and design standards on the previous slide, but efficient, economical, and effective is a category where we might see things like users requiring a manual action to save the screen before moving to the next. It's not automated. Or clicking a button to refresh a screen when you add one sibling and then need to add a second sibling. Things like that would fall under that category. And governance may be lacking, maybe no user input, or if there was user input, it was early in the project and not ongoing. And finally, the user interface. Even though some of these systems are using newer technology, in many ways they replicate old CCWIS systems with lots of tabs and lengthy ways to navigate to the information needed. Not all states in projects, but a few we encountered that. Next slide. All right, here's a few more specific categories where we did see some barriers and risks to CCWIS compliance. So I'll start on the left with project health. We found that in a few, mainly county administered states, but certainly other states too, there's insufficient management of expectations. While there may have been some work at the beginning of a project, there wasn't ongoing communication. And this could fall under change management principles, which is the second bullet. Many projects do focus on change management, and some do it quite well. But what we are more likely seeing is that communication is being called change management, while communication is a part of change management, it's a much broader approach. And oftentimes, there are limited resources allocated to this, whether through contracts with vendors or internal resources. Lack of consistent program and IT collaboration is a big issue in many projects, and we have a slide dedicated to that in a few moments, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but that was an area in multiple projects we saw an issue with. Data quality, search functionality, if you recall, I mentioned was a strength in many projects, but it was also a challenge in many projects. There wasn't really in between there. I'm going to talk about that in a slide. Risk of duplication, because of multiple systems or whether poor search tools was an issue in a few states. Under design, business rules need to be separated from core programming in the CCWIS regulations, and we found in some of our design reviews they were not. Security policies were outdated. For example, in one state, there was no idle timeout, and so screens could be left open and users walk away for half hour, 45 minutes, and it would still stay open. As one example. System documentation was not comprehensive, which is a requirement of CCWIS regs. And then another category, I think I mentioned already, about lack automated saving while completing screens, just an accumulation of some technical debt. And we're really not seeing some of the innovations that we had hoped to be possible through CCWIS funding come to light. What we're seeing often is shinier UI over CCWIS functions. And so we had hoped to see some more innovation, and that's not always what we're finding. And finally, want to highlight that while many states do well to include subject matter experts, that's not true in every case. And we encourage the use of users with lived experience, families, foster families, youth in foster care, and other subject matter experts to be involved in these projects. They lead to stronger outcomes if they are included. Thanks for going to the next slide. So I mentioned I was going to talk about search functionality as a focus. You noticed that it was on both the strengths and challenges, and I mentioned a couple times now that that's because either states had or projects that we reviewed had really strong search using unstructured data and maybe natural language searches, and other projects really archaic late 80s or early 90s type of exact searches, maybe with some fuzzy searching if you add an asterisk. But there are all types of different search tools available out there, often at low cost, that we were surprised not to see. These aren't heavy lifts or costly functions, and so we were pretty surprised not to see this in several of the projects. So I don't need to spend too much time on this slide other than to say that this is an area that we think really affects data quality, or potentially could affect data quality, and adding some robust search to us is a useful effort if it isn't already included in your CCWIS system. Let's go to the next slide. All right, one last thing I'm going to spotlight before turning it over to David. I mentioned earlier that consistent IT and program collaboration was a strength in some projects reviewed, but more often than not, it was not a strength. And we wanted to highlight a few of those scenarios we encountered. I have these bullets on the screen. In one agency we reviewed, they had program and users involved, but it was 3 to 4 years ago, and they were never consulted or involved, and development took 3 years, and then they became involved, and oftentimes it was different program staff and users who weren't involved in the beginning evaluating. They hadn't done testing, and so their first time seeing it was during training. There were missed opportunities there. Another project, the central office staff were involved, but not the users. As a former caseworker myself who moved to state service, after a year or 2 or 3 or 4, you start to lose your touch and remembering what it was like. And so it's important to keep people who are directly involved on these projects. One project, the program staff were procuring things without coordinating with the CWIS and IT teams, which puts one, funding at risk if it's duplicating something already in the CWIS, or two, causing issues with duplication and all sorts of things down the road. Many projects have embraced this low code, no code option, including many that are putting RFPs out as we speak, with the hope that these will lead to quicker turnaround times. We are not seeing those quicker turnaround times, and we are not seeing lower costs with these. Doesn't mean they couldn't be, just we haven't seen them yet. But these low code, no code options do come with the price of perhaps not as much customization or configuration as you might like. And this leads to making decisions about business process changes, which may not be comfortable to the program side to make, or they're being made without their involvement. The next bullet about agency leadership. I don't know that we ever found an agency leader who said they weren't supportive of the project. What we have not seen, though, in every case, is agency leaders who embrace the project are active champions in communicating out that this is a worthwhile project. And what we know from the research and from our experience, if an agency leader or leadership team is not actively involved in these change management efforts, there's a less likely chance that they will be successful. And so more than just being a sponsor who signs off on the project, we encourage agency leaders to be involved. And we had a call with agency directors last month who put out a call to try and spread the word. And that was one of the messages we shared in our meeting with the directors last month. We didn't have directors from every state. We had a bunch, and perhaps many people on the call today were involved. But we hope to have future conversations like that one, where we talk about how they can be involved. And then finally, before I turn it to David, one area that we are seeing a lack of was the involvement and connection between CWIS efforts and other agency priorities, whether they're the CFSR PIP efforts, 40 audits. Some states are implementing practice profiles or practice standards. And we see opportunities there for aligning some of the efforts together. Certainly your annual report to the CB or your 5-year CFSP plans should incorporate your efforts with CWIS. So those are 2 areas we wanted to spotlight. And I'm sure in questions we may get some other questions about different things I've mentioned. I do want to address that question that came up earlier. Phil,
Yeah, please do.
You want me to do it now? Okay.
Yeah, so the question, I'll just read it out loud. So the question was, when are TA monitoring reviews conducted?
So TA monitoring reviews can be conducted at a wide variety of opportunities. So I'm not being wishy-washy there. We're really flexible. So most of these that we have done have been after a module has been developed. If, for example, if we're going to do a design review, we need to see some code, some standards, some architecture. However, and I put a big however there, we have done some reviews where we go early on before something is built, but it's harder because we'll have to probably come back at some point. So more often than not, we've done these reviews when there has been a module developed and built. We prefer to see the live, in use version, because too often we see a demo of a sandbox that doesn't work quite the same way the live version does. So really, it's a flexible answer. We're trying to be accommodating to your agency's development timelines. So I know that I have 2 coming up this year. One will be in August and will be focused on a system that completely is done. And then in November, I'm doing one on a system that has just built their first module and has asked us to come in and take a look at it. I want to open it up to any of my colleagues on the line who want to fill in any gaps I may have missed.
Well, and just a quick follow-up to that, to your response there, who schedules the TA monitoring reviews?
They are done in consultation with your federal analyst. We negotiate a scope. We've developed a scope document that outlines the scope of what we'll look at, the timing of it, who we're going to interview or not interview, what module we're going to look at. So we do this as this is a mutual conversation where we try and agree upon. We know that you have 1,000 priorities and timing can be critical for you for other reasons. Maybe you have a 4E audit, a CFSR that year. And so we really try and negotiate and work that out. So if you are interested in it, please contact your federal analyst. We often will make this a topic of conversation at our monthly calls with you. I hope that answers the listener's question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. I want to, there's another question here that I want to throw out at you, and I like actually to first hand it off to the director of DSS, Teresa Young, who's also with us today. And then I would invite Alex and David to provide their responses as well. So the question is, can we share the nature of some of the innovation that was anticipated?
Okay, so I'm interpreting that question to be like, what would we like to have seen that perhaps we haven't seen? And we saw some systems, new systems that don't have mobile capability. And from our perspective, you know, in this day and age, to buy a brand new CCWIS system that doesn't have mobile capability is not a wise investment. Sometimes we see it might have mobile capability, but it's not mobile capability that's really targeted to the use, you know, the particular users or the actions and activities that worker needs to do. You know, sometimes it may just be a version basically of the system that they can access, but it's not really targeted to support the business process. We would like to see more functionality targeting, you know, different populations. As we mentioned, we think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly with older youth and foster families. The user interfaces have not been as robust really as we would like to have seen them. We would expect basically it be easy to get to different parts of the system. So, you know, you don't have to keep going out back and forth, you know, to try to access different parts of the systems to complete your business process. We would like to see more in workload management. There is, you know, right now with the turnover rate and child welfare being, you know, at an extreme, unlike we've ever seen, we would like to see more help in terms of managing workloads for workers as well as supervisors. We haven't seen that much for prevention. We know this is new, but we think there's a lot of opportunity around prevention and services. Certainly data sharing, we know some of the systems are, you know, not quite to the point where they would have their exchanges, but definitely having more opportunity for having actionable information available in real time to staff. So I will open it up, but I mean, those are just off the top of my head, Phil, but Alex and David may have other thoughts, or even any of the team actually who's on the call. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. David, did you want to add anything, or Alex?
I think, you know, I was thinking about innovation that I've seen, and unfortunately it wasn't within a CCWIS, but it was within a non-CCWIS state, and just their use of natural language processing to look at unstructured data. I think that was at least unique and something different. And I know other states are kind of investigating that a little, as well as some states looking at AI. I know Teresa mentioned workload management, and we were discussing that earlier. I think, you know, she had mentioned that it'd be a great area for AI and ML to actually kind of, you know, invest in, as it's not so, you know, contentious as an area like, you know, investigations or intake, where, you know, to put an algorithm in to determine, you know, whether or not, you know, you're going to indicate on abuse or neglect, you know, would be kind of contentious. So I think workload management could be an area for AI or an ML that could really, help the agencies out.
Great.
I
Thank you.
forgot. Sorry, Phil. I was also wanting to mention tribes. We think sometimes there's a loss of opportunity. We know, we have tribes that have different kinds of relationships with states, and obviously, some tribes feel very strongly most about their sovereignty and don't want to use, a state system. However, there is an opportunity to create instances or modules, that could support tribes that you have 4E agreements with. We would like to see more innovation in that way, and perhaps more innovation around piloting. We're very concerned about SOGI data, and doing some innovation things through piloting. I guess I would say we would really like to see some of those. So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but wanted to make sure I got those in. Alex?
Well, I think at this time you've addressed the question. Just want to make sure we have enough time to go through the slides. Maybe we can circle back around if we need, if we have more time at the end.
Sure.
That sounds great. And also I would say to our participants, if there's certain innovation that you have maybe implemented or you are looking towards, we'd love to see that also in the chat. You can drop it there. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. With
you know
David.
what, Phil? I'm sorry. This is Spencer Wilder. I'd like to just make a brief comment about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Spencer.
Thank you. So good afternoon, all. Spencer Wilder here, Federal Analyst with DSS. And one of the things I can say about innovation is that part of that is really going to be left to how states and tribes have that marriage between program and IT staff. A lot of the innovation, I think, that we're trying to look for is really going to be in the eyes of the holder. And so really partnering with program staffs to not really determine just what they need to do, but figuring out creative ways to do that, saving them time, saving them energy, saving them clicks. I think that is really the story that we're trying to tell, and we're hoping that states can own that in terms of being able to be value add to the work that's being done, and not just have their system be a repository or a holder of what the information related to child welfare is. And so the bottom line, part of that is not really a definition from us pushing it down to the states and the tribes. It's really something that demonstrates the partnership between program staff and IT staff to figure out what's the best way to do this effective, economically, and efficiently.
Great. Thank you. Okay, David, let's go ahead and ask you to come back and join us.
Thank you, Phil. Next slide, please. And as Spencer had mentioned, we're program and IT is really an important part of the CCWIS equation. Applying lessons learned that'll help agencies develop systems, comply with regulations, and meet agency needs. The self-assessment tools need that program and IT collaboration to really get a good look at what is needed within the system. Self-assessment tools can be used at any point in a project, as I stated, from planning all the way through M&L. They're more effective when you use them earlier. So in planning or before an RFP is issued. And there needs to be really a shared responsibility between many partners. Frequent and consistent involvement of agency leadership is critical for success, as Alex had mentioned. And that was one of the issues that we see as a challenge. Those executive leaders needed to really come in on the project and really show that they're invested in this project and moving it forward. We also frequent and consistent involvement of agency leadership, as I mentioned, is critical for success. And user interviews are really invaluable in gathering requirements, testing, and ensuring finished code meets the business needs. User feedback must be frequent and ongoing, and it's one of the most important parts of a project. Conversion is always going to take longer and cost more than you expect, so really plan around that. Other examples of lessons learned that we've come across: speed. balancing between getting things done and getting things done correctly. Also, some platforms are not mature enough to serve in the child welfare arena. So you really need to investigate those projects before, or those applications before you invest in them. Time to develop systems. Schedules for a lot of the projects haven't been realistic. You really need to do a scheduling analysis to determine how long certain modules are going to take to develop. And agencies underestimating the process of integrating legacy systems. This is another big area. If you have a legacy system and you need to integrate with it, you really need to invest time and the proper analysis to determine what and how you're going to be integrating into that legacy system. Also, planning for constant change. As I mentioned, the agency leadership, and Alex mentioned, the agency leadership is critical for success. Part of that is organizational change management and really engaging in it. And it's not just communications. And then also allowing contingencies in contracts can be really helpful, especially when there are challenges between you and your vendor. Separating a rules engine, because if you don't have a separate rules engine, you are at a high risk for not being modular. So that would be a challenge. And then also, as Teresa had mentioned, staffing challenges. There aren't enough program staff around. And then of those program staff, there aren't enough program staff involved in projects. Next slide, please. We've gathered lessons learned from the logistics of the TA monitoring review process. So what we found is a minimum of 6 months is really needed. It says 3 to 6 months. It's really 6 months is needed for a monitoring review, to plan a monitoring review. It takes time for the states to collect and share documentation with us. And it also takes us, the federal team, time to read and evaluate that documentation. The agency should identify a point of contact for scheduling and other review planning activities. And the agency leadership involvement is critical to address governance, change management, and business process redesign. There's great flexibility in the reviews. Some states prefer to book 3 solid days, while others prefer spreading activities out over several weeks. It's really up to you and your analyst how you want to proceed with scheduling an actual review process. And participation for both program and IT teams are essential during demonstrations and discussions about self-assessment tools. Next slide, please. The federal processes and technical systems are evolving from our lessons learned. So as Alex mentioned, we've developed a scope document that was created to help review parameters and ensure agreement between DSS and the agencies. We're also republishing a design scoring sheet, a new version of that, to identify assessment guidelines. And our low-code, no-code toolkit, that's a mouthful. We're going to be publishing shortly to highlight the pros and cons of this approach. Also, change management resources are being developed to support effective implementation, and those will be coming out shortly. Engaging users and lived experience experts as part of system design and usability and review is also an important part of any project. And then finally, we're providing technical assistance in reviewing contracts and RFPs to assist in strengthening the initial and ongoing documents that are the basis for the CCWIS development. So if you need something reviewed, you can always reach out to your federal analyst. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, our focus during 2023-2024 years will be on the data quality, reporting, and user experience. We just held a CCWIS webinar back in March on operationalizing data quality and reporting CCWIS self-assessment tools, and here's the link to it. And additionally, in ISM in September, we'll be presenting the ultimate CCWIS guide to data quality and reporting. So if you're there, please come find us. I'll turn it back over to Phil, see if there are any other questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David, and also to Alex. I wanted to just see or just remind everyone, excuse me, if you would like to ask a question, you can do that in a couple ways. You can drop that in the Q&A feature, which is located at the top or bottom of your screen. We've had several questions come in so far throughout today's webinar, so thank you for submitting those questions. You're also able to use the raise hand feature, and we can take you off mute so you can ask a question live if you're interested. While we were waiting for those questions to come in, I just wanted to circle back with both my presenters, Alex and David, and also to our panelists, Teresa, Spencer, and Stephanie, if you have any other comments you'd like to make before we move on in today's webinar. Maybe I'll start with Teresa.
Oh,
And you can go ahead, Alex. I'll jump in after you.
sure. I think there was one thing I didn't mention earlier when I was answering the listener's question about when do we do reviews. The other thing we have also done is we have, during planning phases, we have provided feedback on, plans. They're not formal reviews, it's technical assistance. But in our minds, it all leads towards coming up with a better product at the end, right? A better service to the users and meeting federal reporting requirements and so on. And so on our regular technical assistance calls, we can provide feedback and also encourage you to use those self-assessment tools to self-identify what it is you may need that you hadn't thought of, because some of those tools have lessons learned from other projects that we try to include, so they could be technical assistance tools as much as they are self-assessment tools. And then one thing I wanted to mention, and then I'll pass it over, is that once we do these reviews, during my slides, I mentioned strengths, challenges. We will write these up in a letter to your agency, listing these strengths and challenges. For the challenges, we will identify what section of the regulation you potentially could have an issue with compliance-wise. So there's no formal response needed for these, but we do follow up perhaps on monthly calls or in APDs with following up on these items. So I want to highlight that some states that have gone through this have made great course corrections to address some of the challenges raised. So that's one of the reasons we value doing these early and iteratively. Is it's not like the old days where you build your system and then we come in and say, oops, here's this thing that isn't working. If we catch it early enough, it gives you opportunity to course correct and make any changes you might need. I think that's all I want to say for that, and hand it over to you, Teresa.
I just wanted to acknowledge those who've participated, who have been very transparent with us. I think one thing that is unique about the process that we were trying to do is that, while we are learning and evolving, and sometimes that makes folks uncomfortable, I think the process in using the tools has given both states as well as federal folks an opportunity to discuss things that might never even come up, if we just sort of did this review at the end of the process. So I really appreciate those states who've, brought the issues to us, because we know that these systems are not perfect, and it makes the whole process and more meaningful. We're not really interested in doing reviews that just come out and, check a box. We really, as Alex said, want to make these things valuable to have better systems to serve populations. We talked a little bit about the business rules engine, and I think one of the challenges that we have with that is translating the need for that in terms of why it matters from a program perspective and from a child welfare perspective, because in some of the reviews, we really sometimes get down into the weeds around technical issues, and sometimes what we see is maybe there's a lack of a bridge in terms of folks understanding the connection between the decisions that they're making about these low code, systems, or the, amount of customization that may be needed, is areas that we are seeing improvements, or at least open conversations. Some of these are hard lessons learned. So again, those states who've also been willing to partner with us to share everything, the successes as well as those things that haven't gone very well, I just want to commend those states because that helps all of us learn. So I'm sure I could think of some other things, but I do want to open it up for David or other folks who wanted to add anything in the time that we have left.
Thank you, Teresa. I was just going to reiterate to the program IT collaboration. I can't emphasize that enough. I think, that's an essential part of really making these projects successful, and providing the agency with what the goals are for child welfare through the use of those program folks, as well as those folks that have lived experience. That's also important as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. We do have a question here, and I'll let maybe our presenters respond first to this one. Have any systems or states passed their review? And maybe Alex, do you want to take the first crack at that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We haven't done a full system review yet. Any of the monitoring reviews we've done have been for specific modules, even a couple modules at a time. We aren't going to certify a system, though. I think on this question has come up on a few webinars. Even two states using the same system may have different implementations of the system. So for us to say one state, the product is certified, would be perhaps not accurate in the other states. So we aren't going to certify systems. We are going to continually review projects until we've looked at the modules and feel confident that it's meeting the CCWIS and program needs. But as new programs are developed, down the road, there may be some new program that we're not aware of today, or some change in an existing program. The systems have to be flexible enough to meet those new program needs. So short answer, no, we have not certified or approved any system, and of the states or projects we've reviewed to date, none were for the complete system.
And Alex, I just want to piggyback on your point too about certification, or actually, as we term it, compliance. This is really an iterative process, and so that even if a system was compliant and found to be CCWIS compliant, they start to develop or redevelop modules that could have to undergo another review for that module, and they could become non-compliant potentially. So it's an ongoing, just like IT is an ongoing process in developing a system. This is an ongoing process.
And I just wanted to comment on this question also, because I think, we're changing what the definition of what pass means. And I know it's really hard because, you're thinking, okay, well, this is a moving target, and how do I, get my head around a moving target? But I think it's kind of an illusion, to say, okay, well, your system passes. We know basically that the system will be potentially, what does that really mean? So if you look on the assessment tools, and they mention basically that those goals, which are largely related to the program or related to efficiency, those are the most important parts of every single tool. The tools can be overwhelming if you look at them all and you think, okay, I got to meet all of this. But there's an opportunity that you have, because what those tools do is they allow you to look at the goals, the outcomes, say, okay, are these the right goals? And then it allows you to say, okay, what do I need, to really understand whether or not that goal is being met? It allows you to say to us, okay, I think if I had ongoing user input on X, or if I had, ongoing data that is telling me, how many times, mistakes are made on this and easily corrected, or, I'm just thinking off things top of my head, but it gives you the freedom to tell us, and the more proactive you are in that, and the stronger kind of data you have, not just kind of giving us screenshots, but you're showing us basically that the technology has resulted in, greater efficiency in the program. And so that would mean, less waiting time, from something to get to one point to another point. More accuracy when people are filling out or trying to complete their data, you're showing over time, how improvements are being made. So it is a shift in thinking from someone coming out and just saying, okay, you have a place in a box where you can enter information. That's not the kind of system I think that really helps child welfare. And so what we're trying to do is change the paradigm to say, work with your program folks. What efficiencies do you really want to see for your program? What are the most important initiatives that the program is working on strategically? And how is the technology that you have, relating to those strategic business goals, that the agency has? So it's ongoing support, it's user involvement, and efficiency, in terms of monitoring over time. How is the technology impacting practice? And it's just really important that we all struggle with this, and it's not easy. But I think we really need to be able to show that the systems are resulting in better practice, better provisions of service, better. There needs to be a linkage, I guess I would say, between improvements that are made and efficiencies. I know this is hard work. It's discouraging for us, to see still, caseworkers turnover also being correlated with, the technology being so hard to use. And so some of the technology is very old. We're a young industry, in some ways, so it's not to be critical. But I say these things to you to look at this as an opportunity. So to move the thinking away from this pass, fail, and we're not here in some ways to get you. We're here to make sure that you have the best system that you possibly can have with the money that you have, to support your program. So I know that's a lot, and it sounds kind of, pie in the sky, but that's what we're working toward.
That's wonderful. Well, I appreciate that. Okay. Very excellent way to, I think, end today's webinar. As we've reached our time, I do want to move to our last slide here, which is our satisfaction survey. That's also been dropped into the chat. Please make sure that you have completed that. We're very interested in your feedback. Those of you that may have submitted questions that we were not able to get to today, please know we will follow up with you. Also, you can ask questions after today's webinar by emailing those to your federal analyst or to CWIS@hhs.acf.gov. Once again, thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. Thank you to our presenters, David and Alex, and also to our panelists, Teresa and Spencer and Stephanie. Once again, thanks for all the work you do on behalf of children and families. And with that, that'll conclude today's webinar. Thanks for being here.